My name is Charlie, and I've always been the responsible one in our family. At 28, I've built a decent career, living in a nice rental apartment. I try to make sensible decisions and stay on top of everything. But if you asked anyone who knows me well, they'd say I'm the reliable one, always doing what's expected of me. My younger brother, Michael, is, well, let's just say he's the complete opposite of me. Growing up, it was never easy being the older sibling. No matter how hard I tried, my parents always seemed to find fault with everything I did. When I got straight A's in high school, they would say, well, that's what we expect from you. But when Michael only managed B's, it was a full-blown celebration. I worked my first job at 16 waiting tables at a local cafe. I was criticized for not focusing enough on school, while Michael spent his summers lounging by the pool and was praised for needing a break. So when my parents' 30th wedding anniversary rolled around, I wanted to do something special, something that would mean a lot to them. I remembered how Mom had always dreamed of visiting Italy. She'd watch Italian cooking shows, talk about the architecture, and long for the country's rich history. I knew it would be the perfect gift, a fully paid trip to Italy, complete with flights, a luxury hotel, and guided tours. I was just about to finalize the booking when my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was sweet, like when he wanted something. "What are you getting Mom and Dad for their anniversary?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to be honest. "I'm booking them a trip to Italy. It's always been Mom's dream." Michael's laugh interrupted me. "You're so predictable, Charlie. The first knew you'd do something boring like that. I'm not telling you what I'm getting, but trust me, it's going to be way better than some dull trip to Italy." With that, he hung up. I just stared at my phone. Michael always had to be the center of attention. People who didn't know him well probably thought he was so interesting, but I knew the truth. Behind all the grand gestures, there was hardly anything of substance. The day of the anniversary dinner arrived. I carefully packed the flight tickets in a beautiful box and headed to the restaurant. When I arrived, it was already buzzing with family members and friends. I made my way to the table, giving Mom and Dad a hug. Michael was already flitting around, directing waiters with exaggerated flair, acting like he was in charge of organizing everything. "Those appetizers need to go on that table," he said to a confused waiter, even though Mom had already arranged everything perfectly. I rolled my eyes but stayed quiet. It was just Michael being Michael, always trying to make everything about him. The gift-giving started, and as I waited for my turn, I saw Michael whispering and laughing with the relatives. The whole evening was revolving around him, and I could already feel my stomach knotting. When it was finally my turn, I stood up, holding my small box with the tickets. But before I could speak, Michael jumped to his feet. "Everyone, look outside," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. Everyone turned to look, and there it was, a brand new red Audi A6, complete with a giant bow on top. My stomach sank. "Mom, Dad," Michael said, beaming, "you deserve nothing but the best. This is my gift to you." The room erupted in gasps and applause. Mom and Dad rushed outside to take pictures with the car. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching my little gift box. I felt small, insignificant, as if I had just been overshadowed in front of everyone. After what felt like forever, the guests started filing back inside. I cleared my throat. I also have something for you," I said, my voice unsteady. Mom and Dad barely glanced at the box as they opened it. "Thank you, Charlie," Dad said, but his voice was flat. Michael's voice cut through the silence. "Well, my gift is obviously way better. I mean, a car versus a vacation? No comparison." Instead of scolding Michael for being rude, Mom and Dad smiled and suggested we all start eating. Throughout dinner, all I could hear were praises for Michael, how generous he was, how thoughtful he was. I pushed my food around my plate, feeling invisible. It was almost too much to bear. After an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I made up an excuse about work and left, not even bothering to say goodbye. 2 weeks passed, and I buried myself in work, trying to keep my mind off how hurt I felt. I stayed late at the office, taking on extra projects, anything to avoid thinking about that night. But no matter how much I threw myself into my work, my family's rejection still gnawed at me. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, an email popped up in my inbox. It was from Michael. I opened it without thinking, only to find an attachment. I froze as my eyes scanned the subject line, "Invoice for Audi A6, $60,000. At first, I thought it must have been a mistake. Maybe he sent it to me by accident. But deep down, I knew better. Michael wasn't someone who did things by accident. I felt the blood drain from my face as I clicked open the attachment. There it was, a formal bill for the car he'd given Mom and Dad. The full amount was due soon, and it was addressed to me. My hands started shaking, and I dialed Michael's number immediately. He picked up on the first ring. His voice sounded casual, almost too casual, like we were talking about the weather. "Hey, Charlie," he chirped. "Got the bill? What is this about?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Oh, that?" Michael replied, as if it were no big deal. "Yeah, I got the car on credit, and I don't have the money to pay for it, so you need to cover it." I felt my blood run cold. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, the words tumbling out in disbelief. "You bought a car you couldn't afford, made a huge spectacle out of giving it to Mom and Dad, and now you expect me to pay for it?" "Exactly," Michael said, sounding completely unfazed. "You've got a good job, right? I'm sure you can afford it." "Michael, this is insane," I said, my voice rising. "You strutted around the restaurant like some big shot and made me look cheap in front of everyone, and now you want me to foot the bill? Absolutely not." Michael sighed, his tone suddenly condescending. "Don't be so dramatic, Charlie. It's just money. You can afford it. Besides, Mom and Dad will be disappointed in you if you don't help." I almost dropped my phone. He was seriously manipulating me. "My own brother. This is your mess, Michael. You clean it up. I'm not paying for your impulsive decisions." Before I could hear another word, I ended the call, but the silence didn't last long. Almost immediately, my phone started ringing again. I ignored it, but it didn't stop. The texts began flooding in, one after another. "You're so selfish. I can't believe you're doing this to your own brother." One text read, "Please, Charlie, you have to help me. The bank is breathing down my neck." Then came another, "You've always been jealous of me, haven't you? Mom and Dad will be so disappointed in you." The manipulation was so blatant, it took everything in me not to respond. I turned my phone off and tried to focus on my work, but it was impossible. My mind was racing, and I couldn't shake off how this felt. By the time I left the office that evening, I had over 50 missed calls and nearly 100 text messages from Michael. But the real shock came when I got home. There, sitting on the steps outside my apartment building, was Michael. His mascara was streaked down his face, and he looked like a child who had been caught in a lie. "Charlie," he cried, jumping up when he saw me. "I've been waiting here for 2 hours. How could you ignore me like this?" I tried to walk past him, but he grabbed my arm. "Please, Charlie, you have to help me. The bank wants the first payment. I don't have it. I can't pay it." I pulled my arm free. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you bought a car you couldn't afford," I said, my voice cold. "Did you think about the payments at all when you were showing off at the restaurant?" Michael started crying harder, but for once, his tears didn't move me. I'd seen this act too many times before. "Instead of standing here crying, you should be figuring out how to pay for the car you bought," I said, my words firm. "This isn't my problem, Michael. It's yours." He screamed in frustration and stormed off, leaving me finally able to enter my building in peace. But I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The days following Michael's demand for me to pay his car bill were a blur. I threw myself into my work, trying to escape the constant barrage of texts and calls from him. The notifications on my phone had become relentless. Every few minutes, another message would pop up, each one more desperate and manipulative than the last. But I refused to respond. Michael was playing a game, and I wasn't going to let him win. Then, one evening, as I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a report, my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. My heart sank. I wasn't ready for another confrontation. I let it ring a few times, but eventually, I knew I had to answer. "Charlie," Mom's voice was sharp, her tone unusually stern. "We need to talk. Come to the house after work." I didn't know what to expect, but I had a feeling I wasn't going to like it. I agreed to meet them and hung up, trying to steady my breath. The tension that had been building over the past few weeks felt unbearable. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about something deeper, something I couldn't put into words. When I arrived at their house that evening, the air felt thick with expectation. The familiar smell of Mom's cooking was absent, replaced by a cold silence. I walked through the door and saw Mom and Dad sitting on the couch, their faces grim. Michael was sitting between them, looking like a helpless child. I knew exactly what was coming. This wasn't going to be a conversation about how I'd been wronged or about Michael's behavior. This was going to be about me, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. Dad spoke first. Charlie. His voice was heavy with disappointment. We've heard everything from Michael. He says you're refusing to help him. Why is that? I stared at them, my mind racing. I couldn't believe this was happening. This wasn't a family that ever valued my boundaries, my sacrifices, or the thought I put into my actions. It had always been about what Michael wanted, what Michael needed. I'm not refusing to help him, I said, my voice steady but filled with a quiet anger. I'm refusing to clean up his mess. Michael made a conscious decision to buy a car he couldn't afford. He didn't ask for advice. He didn't think about the consequences. And now he wants me to fix it. It's not my responsibility. Michael's face contorted with fake hurt. Charlie, you've always been selfish. Mom and Dad are really struggling with this. They're so disappointed in you. I'm not the one to blame here. The words stung, but I refused to let him see it. I had heard this all before Michael playing the victim while I took the blame. This was his usual manipulation, and I wasn't going to let it work on me this time. Mom chimed in, her voice cutting through the tension. You don't understand, Charlie. Michael made a mistake. A big one, yes. But he's our son. He's your brother. Family helps family. We're asking you to help him, and you're refusing. I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. You're asking me to help him by paying off a $60,000 car he bought on credit? I said, incredulous. You're asking me to bail him out for something he did without thinking, just because he's your son? That's not how this works, Mom. Dad's voice was sharp now, his tone growing more insistent. You've always been the responsible one, Charlie. We expect more from you. You can afford it. You have a good job. You should help your brother. We've always supported you. Why can't you do the same for him? My chest tightened, the familiar pang of resentment rising inside me. You've always supported Michael, Dad. You've always given him a free pass while I've been the one who had to prove myself. I've always had to be the responsible one, but I'm not a doormat. Michael's eyes glinted with a sense of victory. He knew how to push all the right buttons. See, Mom? See, Dad? This is exactly what I was talking about. She's always been jealous of me, always competing, and now she's just letting me drown. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to calm myself. I wasn't going to let Michael twist my words or make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. This was about accountability, and if my parents couldn't see that, then I wasn't sure I could fix it. Michael, the first said, my voice tight with control. This isn't about competition. This isn't about jealousy. This is about responsibility. You made a decision. You have to deal with the consequences, and I'm not going to rescue you from your bad choices. I'm sorry. The room fell silent. Michael's face darkened, his previous facade of innocence slipping. Mom's eyes filled with tears, and Dad's expression hardened, disappointment washing over him. I knew they were expecting me to cave, to apologize, to give in to their manipulation, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. Then, just as I thought the conversation was over, Mom reached into her purse and pulled out the tickets to Italy, the ones I had spent months planning. She shoved them in my hands, her voice cold. We don't want gifts from someone who could be so cruel to their own brother, she said, her tone final. Cancel everything. Get a refund and give us the money. We'll use it to help Michael with the car payments. I was speechless. My hands trembled as I held the tickets, the weight of my disappointment settling over me like a heavy blanket. This was it. My gift, the one I had spent so much time planning, was being rejected in favor of Michael's irresponsibility. I stood there for a moment, staring at the tickets in disbelief. Then, slowly, I placed them back in my bag, trying to mask the hurt. I couldn't believe this was happening. So that's it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You'd rather have Michael's car than the trip I've been planning for months? Dad didn't even look at me. Yes, Charlie, we expect you to do the right thing. I wanted to scream, to throw everything in their faces, to demand they see me for who I was, not just as the reliable one or the responsible one, but I didn't. Instead, I simply nodded. Fine, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I'll cancel the trip and get the refund, but don't expect anything else from me. As I turned to leave, I could feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on me. For once, I didn't feel like the dependable older child. I felt like the one who had been cast aside. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. I couldn't get the conversation with my parents out of my head. The way they looked at me, the way they placed their loyalty with Michael, despite his reckless behavior, was like a slap to the face. It was as if all my years of hard work, all the sacrifices I had made to keep the family together, had been for nothing. Everything I had done for them, all the planning, all the sacrifices, meant absolutely nothing. I found myself withdrawing from everything. At work, I was distracted, my focus drifting. I had meetings I was supposed to lead, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being unappreciated and completely misunderstood. And when I wasn't working, I was numb. I had no energy to deal with the drama anymore. It felt like I had been a punching bag for my parents' expectations for my entire life. Then, one evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something for myself. I didn't care about the family drama anymore, and I didn't care about what they thought I should do. I was sick of being the responsible one. I needed to find a way to live for myself. Not for Michael, not for Mom, and not for Dad. I took a deep breath and booked a flight to Mexico. I'd always wanted to go there, to experience the culture, the food, the history. For once, I wasn't planning the trip for anyone else. It wasn't to please anyone. It was all for me. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. The next few days were a blur of organizing details and preparing for my trip. I didn't share it with anyone. Not Michael, not Mom, not Dad. I wasn't looking for their approval, nor did I care to explain myself. I knew what I needed, and I wasn't going to let anyone get in the way of it. I was on my way to reclaiming my life. The day of my flight arrived, and I boarded the plane to Mexico with a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in months. For once, I didn't have to be anyone's anchor. I didn't have to be the one who fixed everything. I didn't have to be the one who held the family together while they fell apart. I was free. As the plane soared above the clouds, I let out a deep breath, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. This wasn't just a vacation. It was an act of self-care, an assertion that I deserved something for myself. I had spent so many years trying to please everyone else, putting my own dreams on hold, sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of a family that clearly didn't see me. But that was about to change. The first days in Mexico, rediscovering myself Mexico, was everything I had hoped for. The bustling streets of Mexico City were a far cry from the quiet suburban life I had known, and I relished in the chaos. The culture was vibrant, the people were warm, and the food was absolutely incredible. The first day, I spent wandering through museums, marveling at the rich history that permeated every corner of the city. I took my time, savoring every moment of it. For the first time in years, I felt alive in a way that wasn't tied to the expectations of others. I wasn't just following a checklist of things to do because someone else would be proud of me. I was following my own desires. At night, I wandered the streets, indulging in street tacos and margaritas. I laughed, I smiled, and I felt the weight of my past life starting to lift. This wasn't about anyone else. It was about me, and it felt amazing. I spent the next few days soaking in the local culture, tasting foods I had only seen in cooking shows, and exploring hidden gems of the city. I went on walking tours, visited local markets, and even took a cooking class where I learned to make authentic Mexican dishes. Everything about the trip was for me, and for once, I felt like I was truly living. I had always put others first, but this was different. I wasn't thinking about Michael's drama or my parents' disappointment. For once, I was doing something for myself, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. The family fallout, the truth comes out. As I settled into the rhythm of my trip, I started receiving messages from family members. At first, I ignored them, but eventually, I felt it was necessary to check in. The flood of notifications from Mom and Michael was overwhelming. I opened one of the messages from Michael, expecting more guilt trips and emotional manipulation. I wasn't disappointed. The text read, "You've abandoned the family, Charlie. You really think you can just leave and forget everything we've done for you? I need help. And you're ignoring me. You've always been selfish. I felt a brief pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of relief. Michael had always been like this, demanding help and playing the victim when things didn't go his way. I was done being manipulated. Next, I saw a message from Mom. It was a long, emotional text filled with guilt and manipulation. I can't believe you're doing this. You've always been so selfish. You took everything away from Michael. The car, the trip. You've broken our family. I let out a laugh that was both bitter and liberating. They had no idea how much they had pushed me. For so long, I had bent over backward to please them, to make them proud. And yet, it was never enough. Nothing I did could ever be right. I thought about replying, but I didn't. This time, I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to try to convince them that I was worthy of their love and respect. I wasn't going to justify my actions anymore. Instead, I decided to do something that felt right. I opened my laptop and began writing a post for social media. I wasn't going to let this family drama stay buried anymore. If my parents and Michael wanted to make everything public, then I would, too. I typed, "Since my mother has chosen to make private family matters public, let me share the full story that she conveniently left out. At my parents' 30th anniversary celebration, I gave them a fully paid luxury trip to Italy, something I spent months planning, knowing how much my mom had always dreamed of it. My brother Michael showed up with a brand new Audi A6, making a big show of presenting it as his gift. What nobody knew was that he had bought it on credit with no means to pay for it. 2 weeks later, he sent me a $60,000 invoice for the car, demanding that I pay for it. When I refused, my parents sided with him and rejected my gift. They even demanded I return the refund money for the trip to pay for his mess. I've spent my life being the responsible one, but now I'm done. I'm choosing to live for myself, not for anyone else. I hit post, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. I was done with being the family scapegoat. I was done letting them control my life and my decisions. The road to healing. The response was immediate. Friends and family members reached out to me, offering their support. The truth was out, and people were finally seeing through Michael's manipulations. It felt good. It felt empowering. As I continued my journey in Mexico, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. I was no longer bound by the expectations of others. I was free. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know if my relationship with my family could ever be repaired. But for the first time in my life, I knew I was making the right choice for myself. And that was enough. The weeks that followed my post were a whirlwind. I had expected some backlash, but I never anticipated just how quickly the narrative would shift. The reaction from my family was swift, but the reactions from the people around me were far more surprising. My phone was flooded with messages, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years, others from friends and relatives who had been quietly watching from the sidelines for far too long. They were all reaching out to express their support, and it was nothing short of overwhelming. At first, I felt strange. It was as if I had opened a door to a room I had been locked out of for so long, and now I was standing in the middle of it, unsure of how to proceed. But with every message, every comment of support, I felt the weight of my past. The years of feeling small, unheard, and manipulated begin to lift. My phone rang one afternoon, and I recognized the number immediately. It was Michael. I hesitated before picking up, but I knew this call was inevitable. It wasn't going to be a friendly chat, but I couldn't avoid it forever. I braced myself for the confrontation. "Charlie," his voice came through the phone, low and tight with anger. "I saw your post. You're really going to air our dirty laundry like that?" I leaned back in the chair, letting out a slow breath. "I'm not the one who made this public, Michael. You and Mom did that long before I posted anything," he huffed, clearly irritated. "You think this is going to make you look like the hero, huh? You think you're in the right? You've ruined everything." I felt a flicker of something deep inside me, a sense of calm that had eluded me for years. "I'm not trying to be the hero, Michael. I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. But I've spent my whole life being the reliable one, the responsible one, and it's never been enough. I did what I did because I'm done playing by your rules. I'm done cleaning up your messes." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, his frustration palpable. But this time, it didn't shake me. "Fine," he finally spat. "I guess this is it then. You're choosing to walk away from your family." I let the words settle in the air between us. "No, Michael. I'm choosing to walk away from the toxic patterns that had been suffocating me. "You don't get to control me anymore." Before he could respond, I ended the call. I didn't need to hear anymore. I had made my peace with this. If Michael wanted to continue playing the victim, that was on him. I was moving on, and I wasn't going to feel guilty for doing so. The family's response, turning the tables. It didn't take long for the fallout from my social media post to spread. My mom, who had always been quick to shield Michael from any criticism, took to Facebook with a post that accused me of being heartless, of abandoning the family when they needed me most. The post was long, filled with all the typical accusations, how selfish I was, how I had torn the family apart, how I had betrayed them. But this time, the response wasn't what I expected. People saw through the manipulation. Relatives who had stayed silent for years began to speak up. Comments poured in, people sharing their own stories of how Michael had always manipulated situations to his advantage, how my parents had favored him, and how they had unfairly placed impossible expectations on me. Aunt Linda, who had always been close to Mom, posted a comment that caught my eye. "Mary, I love you, but I've watched this for years. I've seen how you've let Michael get away with everything, while holding Charlie to impossible standards. It's not right, and it's time someone said something." My heart swelled with gratitude. It felt like a weight was being lifted from my shoulders, like the entire family had finally woken up to the truth. The support I received from my extended family was overwhelming. My cousin Rachel sent me a long message, telling me how proud she was of me for standing up for myself. "You've always been the strong one, Charlie," she wrote. "You deserve to be happy. Don't let them make you feel guilty for choosing yourself." For the first time in my life, I felt like I was on the right side of the story. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the scapegoat. I had simply chosen to stop being the punching bag, and it felt damn good, taking control of my life. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a routine that was entirely my own. Mexico had given me a taste of freedom, but I knew there was more to discover. I had always been the responsible one, always looking after others. But now, for the first time in a long while, I was doing what I wanted, without considering anyone else's expectations. I spent my days exploring different parts of Mexico. I traveled to Oaxaca for its food scene, tasting traditional dishes and experimenting with new recipes. I went to Tulum, where I spent hours on the beach, listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. And I ended my journey in the Yucatan Peninsula, exploring the ancient Mayan ruins that had always fascinated me. Throughout it all, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't just living for myself. I was learning how to live for myself. I took up new hobbies, things I had never had the time for before. I enrolled in a photography class and learned how to capture the beauty of the world around me. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, rediscovering a passion I had abandoned in my pursuit of responsibility. And through it all, I kept my distance from my family. The phone calls from Mom continued, but I didn't answer. I knew what she was going to say, and I didn't need to hear it. I was carving out my own path, and for the first time, I felt free. A call for reconciliation, then. One afternoon, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me it was important. I hesitated, but I picked up. It was Mom. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost tentative. "Charlie, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. I know I've been hard on you, and I see now that I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm sorry." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years waiting for an apology that I had convinced myself it would never come. But now, here it was. "I don't know if things will ever go back to the way they were," she continued, "but I want you to know that I see you. I see how much you've given, how much you've sacrificed, and I'm sorry for not recognizing that sooner." I sat in silence for a moment, processing everything she had said. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her, or if I ever would be. But in that moment, I knew one thing. I was finally in control of my life, and that was enough. "I don't know what the future holds, Mom," I said, my voice steady but calm. "But for now, I need to focus on me. I need to keep moving forward." She didn't argue. She simply said, "I understand. Take care of yourself, Charlie." And with that, the call ended. It wasn't the resolution I had dreamed of. It wasn't the perfect reconciliation I had hoped for. But it was a start. Conclusion. Embracing the future. As I looked out over the beautiful landscape of the Yucatan, I felt a sense of clarity that I had never experienced before. I didn't know what the future held for my relationship with my family, and I wasn't sure I cared. What mattered now was that I was living for myself. I was no longer the responsible older sibling, caught in a web of manipulation and expectation. I was free. For the first time in my life, I was doing what I wanted, and that was enough. Story 2. I never thought I'd be the guy to end up in a situation like this. My girlfriend, Lauren, had always been a bit different. We'd been casually friends since college, but it wasn't until after she graduated that we started dating. We clicked right away, at least. I thought we did. For the first 5 months, everything felt like a dream until it started turning into something else. I should clarify. When I say princess syndrome, I don't mean she's spoiled or entitled. Lauren is far from that. She's one of the most grounded, kind-hearted people I know. It's just that her style, her look, really dominates every room we walk into. Think frilly skirts, delicate lace blouses, and floral patterns, the kind of thing you'd expect at a themed event, but she wears it every day. You might see someone like her at a costume party, but this is just Lauren's wardrobe, her daily attire, not a special occasion. At first, I found it charming. She looked like she stepped out of a fairy tale, and I loved how effortlessly beautiful she was. But then it became a lot. I'm talking about hours spent curating her outfits, updating her blog, responding to followers, working on new outfits for her Etsy shop. I respect her hustle. I really do. But the time she invested in her appearance was overwhelming. And honestly, it made me uncomfortable. Lauren's blog had a substantial following. She posted outfit pictures, linked clothing items, and interacted with her fans regularly. This wasn't just an occasional hobby. It was a daily ritual. We couldn't go anywhere without getting stares, and not just a quick glance here and there. People stopped in their tracks to look at her, pointed her out to their friends, or worse, snuck pictures when they thought she wouldn't notice. I'd seen it firsthand. Once, while at a cafe, a guy at the next table pretended to text, but was actually trying to take a picture of her in her lace blouse and long, flowing skirt. Another time, a group of teenagers giggled and took selfies in the mall with Lauren unknowingly in the background. It wasn't the occasional attention that bothered me. It was the fact that it felt constant. It felt like we were always on display. We couldn't even enjoy a quiet moment together without someone looking at her, whispering, or worse, taking a picture. It became so invasive, I started to feel like we couldn't go anywhere without attracting attention. I brought it up to her, hoping she'd understand where I was coming from. I told her I loved her style, really. I did, but I wanted her to tone it down a little when we went out. I thought I was asking for something simple, but she misunderstood me. She thought I meant she should stop wearing flower crowns or headbands in her hair, so she stopped wearing them. While that was a small change, it didn't address the bigger issue. She was still wearing elaborate outfits, and the stares and photos kept coming. I felt like we were stuck in a loop, and nothing I said seemed to get through. I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't criticizing her creativity or the way she dressed. I told her I admired her individuality and how it had drawn me to her in the first place. But every time I brought it up, she smiled, thanked me, and moved on to another topic. It was like she wasn't really hearing me, or maybe she didn't want to. The more I thought about it, the more I realized my concerns were deeper than just the attention. I had hoped that once she started her new job, her dream job, in fact, it might encourage her to dress more professionally. I imagined that in the office environment, she'd adapt and find a balance between her whimsical style and something more office appropriate. But that didn't happen. If anything, her colleagues encouraged her. Her new boss, who I thought would push for a more conservative look, actually complimented her style, calling it quirky and fashion-forward. It's like she had become the office mascot, the quirky fashionista everyone admired. I was happy for her truly. But part of me feared that the attention she was receiving in the workplace could become a double-edged sword. I worried that people wouldn't take her seriously. Her brilliance, her kindness, and her intelligence, these were qualities I knew well, but I feared they'd be overshadowed by her appearance. In a professional setting, appearances matter. I wanted people to see her for who she truly was, not just the whimsical princess she presented to the world. I didn't want to control her. I didn't want to tell her how to dress or change who she was, but I also didn't want her to lose opportunities because of how people perceived her. It felt like a delicate balance, loving her for who she was while trying to protect her from unnecessary judgment. I didn't know how to approach this conversation without sounding like I was trying to limit her. but I knew it was something I needed to talk about. I spent so much time trying to figure out how to bring this up in a way that wouldn't hurt her feelings. I wasn't asking her to stop being herself. I was just hoping for a little compromise. I wanted her to see that she didn't need to wear all the frilly stuff to look stunning. Her natural beauty and grace were more than enough to make her shine. But every time I tried to talk to her about it, I just couldn't get the message across in a way that made sense. How could I express my concerns without it sounding like I was attacking her or her style? It's a tricky thing, loving someone and wanting the best for them while trying to be respectful of their identity. But all I could do was try, even if it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. The call came out of nowhere. Lauren asked if she could swing by my apartment after work, and her tone immediately set off alarms in my head. She didn't sound like herself. There was a quietness to her voice, a sort of heaviness I couldn't ignore. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she was just tired from the workday. But when she showed up, I could see it in her eyes. She had this look, like she was carrying something big, something important. It made my stomach twist into knots. I greeted her the usual way, trying to keep things light. But the moment she walked in, I knew this wasn't going to be a regular evening. She looked beautiful, of course she always did, dressed in one of her signature outfits, a soft pink lace blouse and a long, flowing floral skirt that made her look like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. But there was something different, something I couldn't quite place, but it was there. Like an unspoken tension hanging in the air. "Do you want me to make dinner?" I asked, trying to break the ice. She usually loved my cooking, and I figured if I could get her to relax a little, we could talk about whatever was on her mind. But she shook her head, looking at me with this almost apologetic expression. "No, we need to talk," she said, her voice soft but firm. The way she said it like it was a statement, not a request, made my heart drop into my stomach. I laughed, trying to keep the mood light. "You're not breaking up with me, are you?" I said it as a joke, but the moment the words left my mouth, I could tell by the look on her face that it wasn't a joke at all. Her eyes dropped to the floor, her fingers nervously tugging at the hem of her skirt. That was when I knew. Even though I didn't want to admit it, I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. She took a deep breath, and for a second I thought she might say something like, "I'm just stressed," or "It's nothing serious," but that's not what she said. "I've been thinking about this for a while," she started, her voice trembling just slightly. "I think we're in different places in life, and we want different things for the future." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for any hint of understanding. "It's not an easy decision, but I think we need to break up." I don't know what hurt more, the words themselves or the way she said them. We both knew the conversation was coming, but hearing her actually say it, putting it out into the world, made it feel real. My chest tightened, and I suddenly felt like I was choking on the lump that had formed in my throat. I didn't know what to say at first. I just sat there, stunned, while she continued talking. She explained that she had been wrestling with these thoughts for a while now, and that we were growing apart in ways that she hadn't been able to ignore anymore. She said we cared about each other, but our goals, our visions for the future, they were just too different. And as much as I wanted to fight it, a part of me had been sensing this for a while. I'd seen the cracks, felt the distance, but I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. Now, here it was. I listened quietly as she spoke, each word sinking deeper into my chest. She didn't say anything I didn't already know, but hearing her voice it out loud made it harder to ignore. I wanted to argue, to try and convince her to stay, but I also knew that this wasn't something that could be fixed with just a few words. We were at different points in our lives, and no matter how much I loved her, it wasn't enough to bridge the gap. When she finished talking, there was a long pause. I felt like I should say something, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was nod, acknowledging what she was saying. The silence between us was deafening. I think we both knew what was coming, but it still hit harder than I could have imagined. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting or tears, just an understanding that we were at an end. We agreed to stay friends, though in that moment, the idea of friendship seemed impossible. The thought of trying to maintain any kind of relationship, even a platonic one, felt like too much. I didn't know how to move forward with her in my life, even in a different way. When she left, it was like the air in the room had been sucked out. I stood there in the silence of my apartment, feeling the weight of the conversation hang heavy in the air. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything, but it all felt like a blur. I had never been dumped before, and it was just as awful as everyone said it would be. As I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, I realized that part of me wasn't just mourning the end of the relationship, but the loss of what could have been. We had so much potential, at least. I thought we did. But the reality was, we were living in different worlds, and no amount of love could change that. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just the way things were. It's funny how a breakup can leave you feeling like you've been kicked out of your own life. You think you've got everything figured out, but the moment something like this happens, you realize just how much you still have to learn about yourself. After Lauren left, everything just felt off, like I was walking around in someone else's shoes. I had to get used to the quiet again, the kind that comes with being alone after you've shared space with someone for months. For the first few days, I couldn't stop thinking about her, what she was doing, if she was okay, if she'd miss me the way I missed her. And that wasn't even the hardest part. It was the way everything had changed, even the smallest things, like social media. I never thought I'd get tangled up in that. But there I was, checking her Instagram every few hours, watching as her followers left sweet comments, and all these guys who looked nothing like me liked her posts. It wasn't like I thought she'd start seeing someone else immediately, but the reality of it hurt. Seeing these alternative-looking guys commenting on her pictures made my stomach churn. I didn't have a reason to worry she wasn't seeing anyone, but there was still that gnawing feeling. It's not like I was jealous, but seeing that much attention made me feel small, like I was just another chapter in her life she was leaving behind. My friend Jamie noticed I was down and suggested I should go on a date. "You need to move on," he said. "There are plenty of fish in the sea." Maybe he was right. But the thought of starting fresh with someone new felt overwhelming. I wasn't sure if I was ready to dive back into anything, let alone date someone else. The idea of trying to be open and vulnerable with someone again, it felt like I was asking too much of myself. My heart wasn't there, and no matter how many times I tried to tell myself I was okay, the truth was I was still processing everything that had happened. Then, I started reflecting on the reasons we broke up in the first place. I understood a lot of it now. Looking back, our dreams were just too different. She wanted to stay in the city, the heart of it all, with the chaos and the creativity. And I had always wanted to move somewhere quieter, somewhere with less noise, less traffic, and a slower pace of life. I imagined us in a little house by a lake, maybe with a garden or a small farm. That was my dream. It was hard to let go of the vision I had built in my head, but I had to admit, it wasn't Lauren's dream. She loved the city. It gave her life. It gave her the platform for her blog, the connections, and the energy she thrived on. I got it. I really did. But as much as I wanted to make it work, I also knew that I couldn't force her to change what made her happy. That was her world, and I had my own. We couldn't have both. I had always been a bit of a planner. I pictured our future together, and when she didn't see it the same way, it hurt more than I expected. I wanted us to move forward together, but in the end, we were just too far apart. We had different ideas of where we wanted to go, and no matter how much we cared about each other, that difference was too big to ignore. What stung the most was her calling me controlling. That wasn't what I was trying to do, not at all. I wasn't trying to tell her how to dress or dictate her life. I just wanted to protect her, to make sure she wasn't getting hurt by all the attention she was getting. I'd seen how people reacted to her, and it worried me. I didn't want anyone to underestimate her, or worse, to make her feel unsafe. But in her eyes, I think she saw it differently. She saw it as me trying to change her, and that wasn't what I wanted at all. But that's the thing about relationships. It's easy to think you're on the same page, that you're both heading in the same direction. But sometimes, you find out you're reading different books entirely, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just life. A few weeks after the breakup, I realized I was starting to heal. It wasn't easy, but with time, I began to see that the breakup wasn't the end of my story. It was just a chapter. And while it had hurt, it had taught me a lot about what I really wanted. I still cared for Lauren, and I always would, but I was starting to see that I needed something different, something more aligned with where I wanted my life to go. I was trying to move on, but life had a funny way of reminding me that things don't always go the way you plan. A couple of months later, I bumped into Lauren at a coffee shop. She looked different, happier. Maybe her style had toned down a little. It wasn't as frilly as before, but she still had that same unique, whimsical look to her. We caught up, talked about life, about her new job, and the things she'd been working on. It was nice, but it felt like we were from two different worlds now. She had moved on, and so had I. I'm glad we're still friends, in a way. We don't talk much, but we'll occasionally like each other's posts on social media. I've seen her updates, and she seems happy. She's married to a woman now, someone who shares her creative passion. They live on a farm still in the city, but out in the countryside, away from all the hustle and bustle. It looks like the kind of life she always dreamed of, and I'm glad she found that. As for me, I'm in a better place now. I've been with someone else for a few years, Catherine. She's everything I was looking for, and more. We've built a life together that feels right. We share common goals, and I've learned to appreciate the beauty in having someone who gets where I'm coming from. We've got a little girl now, Ava. She's turning 3 soon, and being her dad has been the greatest gift I could have ever asked for. I've changed a lot since the breakup. I've learned how to be more patient, how to support the people I love without trying to change them. I've learned that sometimes the best way to love someone is to let them go if their path leads somewhere different. Life's too short to hold on to things that don't fit anymore. I don't regret the time I spent with Lauren, but I also don't regret where I am now. The lessons I learned from that relationship shaped me into the person I am today. I still think about her sometimes, but it's different now. I'm proud of what we had, and I wish her nothing but the best. She's living the life she always wanted, and I found mine, and that's the way it should be.